Imagine standing in a crowded room. Voices rise and fall, laughter fills the air, emotions ripple through every face. Yet you feel nothing. Not joy, not anger, not pain. Just stillness. A quiet, impenetrable calm. Most people would call that emptiness. But what if I told you that within this calm lies one of the most powerful and misunderstood forces of human nature? Indifference. Today we are going to explore what indifference truly is, why it frightens people so deeply, and how it can become a source of immense strength when understood and mastered. Because the truth is, indifference is not weakness, apathy, or lack of care. It's a hidden form of emotional mastery that only a few ever learn to wield. And in the final part of this video, we'll reveal the most powerful form of indifference, the one that has the potential to completely change the way you see life, love, and even suffering itself. Before we begin, if you enjoy deep reflections about the human soul, philosophy and psychology, if you seek understanding beyond the surface, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Because what you're about to discover might change the way you interpret every emotional reaction, every relationship, and every inner conflict you've ever experienced. Now, let's dive into the essence of indifference. Indifference has always been feared because it represents something society doesn't know how to control. People can manipulate your love, your anger, even your fear, but not your indifference. When you become indifferent, you become unpredictable. You no longer react according to other people's expectations. You stop being emotionally programmable, and that is what terrifies those who thrive on control and emotional dependence. Philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche understood this deeply. He once said that the higher man is distinguished from the lower by his fearlessness in the face of the tragic. What Nietzsche meant was that a higher, freer individual learns not to be enslaved by emotional turbulence. To him, indifference was not coldness but transcendence, a state in which you observe life's storms without drowning in them. Think about it. From the moment we are born, we are taught to react, to seek approval, to defend ourselves, to fight for attention, to explain, to prove our worth. But what happens when we stop reacting? When we no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone? That's when indifference begins to emerge, not as emptiness, but as liberation. Indifference is not about not feeling. It's about feeling deeply but refusing to be enslaved by those feelings. It is when you can witness pain and not let it consume you, when you can face rejection and remain whole, when you can love without losing yourself. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Roman emperors and philosophers, taught that freedom lies in being able to control one's internal state, regardless of external chaos. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Behind this simplicity lies the secret of emotional sovereignty, the capacity to act according to principle, not reaction. That's indifference in action. But here's what most people get wrong. Indifference is not cruelty. It's not a lack of empathy. In fact, it's the only way to practice genuine compassion. When you are emotionally attached to every outcome, every opinion, every insult, you become reactive, and your kindness turns into weakness. But when you are indifferent to the noise, you act out of clarity, not emotion. That is when kindness becomes strength. Ask yourself this: how many times have you suffered not because of what happened, but because of how you reacted? How many nights have you lost sleep over something that, in the end, didn't deserve your energy? Indifference is the art of not wasting your soul on what cannot be changed, and yet society conditions you to believe that if you don't react, you don't care, that if you don't chase, you lack passion, that if you don't respond, you're weak. But the truth is, the greatest strength lies in your silence, in your ability to remain unmoved by things that are beneath your peace. Think of the Buddha sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, unmoved by temptations, insults, and illusions. His calm was not ignorance, it was enlightenment. His indifference to praise or blame was not arrogance, it was mastery. To be indifferent is to no longer be a puppet pulled by the strings of desire, fear, and validation. Yet here's the paradox. Indifference can destroy as much as it can heal. When used unconsciously, it becomes a weapon, a shield against vulnerability, a way to avoid connection, a path to emotional numbness. But when used consciously, it becomes the foundation of true power. So the question is, How do we distinguish between destructive indifference and liberating indifference, between emotional numbness and inner peace? That is where our journey truly begins. Because in the next part, we'll explore how indifference can transform relationships, self-image, and even suffering itself, and why those who master it become untouchable in a world ruled by emotional chaos. Indifference, when properly understood, becomes the most elegant response to a world that constantly demands your reaction. It is the silent rebellion against manipulation, a rebellion that takes place not outside, but within. To master indifference is to master yourself, and to master yourself is to become free. Think about how the modern world thrives on emotional agitation. News cycles provoke outrage. Social media feeds feed envy and insecurity. Relationships are often built on emotional dependency, one person's peace resting entirely on the other's approval. In such a world, indifference is heresy, because the moment you stop reacting, you stop participating in the game. You begin to live by your own rules. But this is not an easy path. The first thing that happens when you become indifferent is that people start accusing you of being cold or heartless. They say you've changed, that you don't care anymore. And in a sense, they're right. You don't care about the unnecessary drama, the constant need to prove your worth, or the emotional games that drain your spirit. You begin to care only about what truly matters. Carl Jung once wrote that detachment is not indifference, it is the prerequisite for the highest kind of love. This statement reveals the paradox that most people fail to grasp. Indifference is not the absence of feeling, but the purification of it. When you stop clinging to outcomes, you finally start to love purely, without fear, without possession, without control. Let's explore this in relationships. When you are indifferent to whether someone stays or leaves, you don't become cruel. You become honest. You no longer hold others hostage to your expectations, and you no longer let their moods dictate your peace. You can love fully, but if that love isn't returned, you don't collapse. Because your center is not in them, it's in you. That's what true independence looks like. It's not shouting that you don't need anyone. It's quietly knowing that you can be whole, even when you're alone. Indifference gives you that strength, the ability to walk away with peace instead of resentment, to forgive without seeking reconciliation, to lose something and not lose yourself. This emotional sovereignty is the mark of the mature soul. It doesn't mean you feel less, it means you've learned how to feel wisely. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Indifference in this sense is not detachment from life, but mastery over reaction. But to reach that state, something must die within you, the part of you that constantly seeks validation. Most people suffer not because of rejection, but because they internalize rejection as proof of inadequacy. The indifferent person sees rejection differently, not as a wound, but as information. They don't take things personally because they understand that most human behavior is driven by other people's wounds, fears, and projections. Imagine for a moment if you could walk through life without being disturbed by gossip, criticism, or betrayal. If you could listen to an insult and feel nothing, not because you're cold, but because you understand that the insult says more about the one who speaks than about the one who hears. That is the serenity that indifference brings. But here's the challenge. Indifference must be born from consciousness, not bitterness. When someone has been hurt deeply, they often turn to indifference as a defense mechanism. They shut down, disconnect, and call it peace. But that's not peace. That's paralysis. True indifference is not a wall that hides pain. It's a doorway that transcends it. It doesn't numb you. It liberates you. So how do you tell the difference between healthy indifference and emotional numbness? The answer lies in presence. When you're indifferent in a healthy way, you're still fully present. You can feel love, empathy, and sadness, but you don't drown in them. You're observing emotions, not controlled by them. But when you're numb, you're absent. You avoid emotions entirely. It takes courage to practice conscious indifference. It requires you to let go of control, the control over how others perceive you, the control over outcomes, the control over being right. It is a surrender of ego, not a rejection of emotion. This kind of surrender transforms your entire inner world, because once you stop fighting for validation, you stop being reactive. You begin to move through life with quiet confidence, unbothered, centered, grounded. You become like a still lake reflecting the chaos around it, without becoming chaotic itself. Ask yourself, when was the last time you reacted impulsively and regretted it later? How often have you been pulled into someone else's emotional storm, only to realize later that it wasn't even your storm to begin with? The power of indifference is the power to say, "This does not belong to me." As Viktor Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, that sacred pause, is indifference. It's the ability to exist between what happens and what you choose to feel about it. And when you start living from that space, you stop being controlled by circumstances. You stop being a slave to emotions, opinions, or outcomes. You begin to live from a deeper dimension, one rooted in awareness, not reaction. In the next part, we will uncover how to cultivate this kind of indifference in practice, how to develop it without falling into cold detachment, and how this power can protect you from manipulation, emotional exhaustion, and self-sabotage. Because mastering indifference is not about withdrawing from life, it's about finally becoming free within it. True indifference, conscious, balanced, awakened, begins with understanding that everything external is temporary. Every praise fades, every criticism dissolves, every relationship changes form. The one thing that remains constant is your inner state, your capacity to stay centered amidst impermanence. When you realize this, your attachment to outcomes begins to weaken. You stop expecting life to unfold according to your desires, and instead begin to observe it with calm awareness. This is not resignation, it's wisdom. You start to see that things do not have to go your way for you to be at peace. That peace is no longer conditional. Many of history's greatest minds understood this. The Stoics called it apatheia, not apathy, but the mastery of passion. The Buddhists called it upekkha, the serene equanimity of mind. In modern psychology, it is emotional regulation, the ability to experience emotions fully without being consumed by them. All these traditions point to the same truth. Freedom begins when reaction ends. Imagine facing a difficult person, someone who constantly provokes you, tests your patience, or disrespects your boundaries. The instinctive response is to fight back, to prove a point, to show them you're right. But in doing so, you become entangled in their chaos. Indifference, however, allows you to remain untouched. You no longer need to prove anything because you no longer need their validation. Their behavior no longer defines your inner state. That is the essence of psychological power. When you are indifferent, manipulation loses its grip on you. Emotional blackmail stops working. Guilt, shame, and fear can no longer be used against you. People who thrive on control eventually realize they cannot control someone who no longer reacts, and so they retreat. But let's be clear, indifference does not mean weakness or passivity. It is not sitting back and letting life happen. It is acting with calm clarity, without the fog of emotion clouding your decisions. It is saying no when needed, walking away when necessary, and speaking truth without aggression. It's what Seneca meant when he wrote, "He who is brave is free," because only the brave can remain calm in the face of provocation. This state of being changes not only how you deal with others, but also how you deal with yourself. The indifferent person learns to be at peace with their own flaws. They stop overanalyzing every mistake, every imperfection, every awkward moment. They understand that self-criticism is another form of ego attachment, the belief that everything must revolve around the self. Indifference toward one's own failures allows growth to happen naturally, without self-torture. Think of how many people exhaust themselves trying to control what others think of them. Every gesture, every post, every word becomes an act of performance. But the truth is, no matter how hard you try, you cannot control perception. People will see you through the lens of their own experiences, not yours. Indifference to opinion is therefore the highest freedom. You no longer seek to be liked. You seek to be true. This freedom manifests in small, subtle ways. The ability to say less and mean more. The capacity to walk away from conflict without needing to win. The serenity to let others misunderstand you without rushing to explain. Because the one who is truly free no longer trades peace for validation. Yet to reach this level, something deeper must shift within. Your relationship with emotion itself. Many believe that emotions are enemies to be conquered, but that's not true. Indifference does not reject emotion, it redefines its role. You can feel anger but not act from it. You can feel sadness but not drown in it. You can love but not lose your balance in love. In this sense, indifference is emotional intelligence in its purest form. It is the art of feeling everything, yet being enslaved by nothing. But how does one cultivate this power in daily life? It begins with awareness, the ability to notice the moment before reaction, the breath before the argument, the thought before the word. When you pause, you create space, and in that space you choose. For example, when someone insults you, the untrained mind reacts instantly. Anger rises, defenses form, the heart rate spikes. But the indifferent mind observes. It recognizes the emotion but does not obey it. It asks, "Is this worth my energy?" Most of the time the answer is no. And in that moment, power returns to you. Meditation, journaling, and solitude are tools that strengthen this awareness. They teach you to witness your thoughts without attachment. Over time, your emotional storms calm. What once provoked you now barely moves you. That is the quiet transformation that indifference brings. It doesn't make life easier, it makes you stronger. But perhaps the greatest gift of indifference is the peace it brings in suffering. When you are indifferent to the idea that pain should not exist, suffering loses its power. You begin to accept that life includes both joy and loss, beauty and decay, light and darkness. You no longer resist the natural rhythm of existence, and resistance is what creates pain. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." Indifference allows you to face suffering without collapsing. It gives you the distance to extract meaning instead of drowning in despair. Ask yourself, what would my life look like if I stopped giving power to what doesn't matter? If I stopped reacting to every criticism, every disappointment, every uncertainty, you would become untouchable, not because you built walls, but because you discovered the strength of inner stillness. And this brings us closer to the ultimate secret of indifference, the one few ever reach. The final and most powerful form of indifference that transcends even the ego itself. In the next part, we will uncover this truth, the spiritual dimension of indifference, where it ceases to be a psychological defense and becomes a path to enlightenment. There comes a moment in every seeker's life when indifference transcends psychology and enters the realm of the sacred. It is no longer about managing emotions or avoiding pain. It becomes about awakening. This is the highest form of indifference, one that the mystics, sages, and enlightened beings of every age have quietly pointed toward. It is the indifference not of the mind but of the soul, the calm that arises when you realize that everything you experience is fleeting and that your true essence remains untouched. This is what the ancient mystics called detachment from the world of illusion. The Buddha called it nirvana, the extinguishing of the fires of craving and aversion. In Christian mysticism, Meister Eckhart described it as Gelassenheit, the spiritual release where the soul rests in God, free from the tyranny of desire and fear. In each of these paths, the message is the same. To be indifferent to the transient is to awaken to the eternal. At this stage, indifference no longer feels like resistance. It feels like peace. You don't need to withdraw from life because life itself becomes sacred in its impermanence. You can laugh, cry, love, and lose, and through it all, remain aware that nothing can truly harm who you are beneath it all. You begin to see that everything, even suffering, plays its part in your unfolding. This understanding gives rise to what we might call divine indifference, not coldness, not detachment, but unconditional acceptance. It is the serenity that comes when you no longer divide the world into good and bad, success and failure, gain and loss. You stop resisting what is, and in doing so, you discover a peace that cannot be shaken. Think of the ocean. Its surface can be wild, full of waves, storms, and turbulence, yet in its depths there is silence, the vast, still, eternal. The wise live from that depth. They move through the surface of life with grace, because they know they are not the waves. They are the ocean. This is the heart of true indifference. When you understand that your inner being is beyond pleasure and pain, praise and blame, then no event in the external world can enslave you again. You have found the unshakable center, what the Stoics called ataraxia, and what spiritual masters have long referred to as enlightenment. But this realization demands courage, because to reach it, You must be willing to let go of everything you cling to: identity, control, even meaning itself. You must be willing to lose yourself completely to find yourself fully. That's why so few ever walk this path. Indifference at this level requires the death of the ego, and the ego will fight for its life. It will tell you that if you let go, you will lose everything: your passion, your individuality, your humanity. But the truth is, you lose nothing real, only the illusions that keep you trapped. When you release the need to be right, to be liked, to be validated, what remains is pure being, consciousness itself, radiant and free. In that space, love takes on a new form. It is no longer possessive or conditional. It becomes boundless compassion. Because you are no longer identified with the small self, you can love without fear. You no longer need to control or own anything. You give because giving is your nature. You forgive because forgiveness is freedom. That is the paradox of spiritual indifference. The moment you stop needing love, you become love. This is the lesson that mystics like Rumi and Lao Tzu tried to express through poetry and paradox. Rumi wrote, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there." That field is indifference to the dualities of the human mind. It is the space where love exists without attachment, where joy arises without reason, where peace is not earned but remembered. When you begin to live from this awareness, life transforms. You stop chasing. You stop running. You stop fighting against what is. You live in a state of effortless flow, doing without striving, acting without forcing, loving without clinging. You no longer ask life to fit your expectations. You allow life to express itself through you. This is not apathy, it is harmony. You participate in the world more fully than ever before, but now from a place of wholeness. You can look at tragedy and still feel compassion, but without despair. You can face uncertainty and still move forward, but without fear, because you finally understand that nothing that truly belongs to you can ever be taken away, and nothing that is not yours will ever stay. This is why indifference is so misunderstood, because to those still living in emotional dependence, it looks like detachment or arrogance. But in truth, it is the highest form of love, love freed from need, love purified of fear. The one who has reached this level does not close their heart. They open it completely. They are indifferent, not because they don't care, but because they care from a higher dimension, one that no longer demands or suffers. And perhaps this is the most powerful truth of all. Indifference is not the death of emotion, but the resurrection of the soul. It is the return to your original state, calm, clear, infinite. So if you find yourself in chaos surrounded by noise and conflict, remember this: you don't have to react. You don't have to fight every battle or prove every point. You can step back, breathe, and choose stillness. In that stillness, you will discover the quiet strength that nothing and no one can take away. As the philosopher Alan Watts once said, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." That is the essence of indifference. When you stop stirring the water of life, the reflection becomes clear, and what you see is your true self, untouched, eternal, free. Because in the end, indifference is not a wall that separates you from the world. It is the doorway that leads you back to yourself. Thanks for looking.